No regrets.
No regret.
To those who thought they could destroy you, Nadia Murad's spirit is not broken.
Who do we turn to for our people's right to survive?
My voice is kapot.
Hello. Hi, you can hear me. Great. Welcome, everyone, to the PechaKucha Human Rights Weekend event. My name is Adela, and Ari will be hosting this evening of presentations. So, to introduce the concept of PechaKucha a little bit first, because I don't know if you all are very acknowledged with it, but we're going to organize the event by us, Golfstromen, part of Pop-Up City, which is a urban transformation agency, along with the Human Rights Watch, of course, and very kindly hosted by the Balie. Thank you very much for that. So PechaKucha as a concept sounds very sort of tropical. It comes from Japan, namely this architecture studio that came up with the idea of having a platform for people to present their concepts, their ideas, and whatever else they wanted to share creatively with other people. So in 2003 in Japan, the first PechaKucha evening was hosted. And what PechaKucha means practically is that every speaker has 20 slides, and each slide is shown on the screen for 20 seconds, which means that every presentation is in total 6 minutes. And the reason for that is actually that architects can be very talkative, and people wanted to sort of condense the ideas and the projects that they had in a short amount of time, but make it very, short and sweet and precise. PechaKucha evenings, as you can see on this very Eurocentric map, are hosted all around the world, in Australia as well, I promise, it's just not here. But it's in thousands of cities all over the world, and our connections and the group is growing overall. We have a website, PechaKucha.Amsterdam, where you can see our previous events. We've already hosted over 40 PechaKucha evenings in Amsterdam. And if you're interested in knowing who already spoke at our events, or if you're interested in coming to the next one, if you like this one, you can see everything on the website. We are also very social in this modern social media world, and you can find us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter at PechaKucha Amsterdam. So, the speakers for tonight are listed right here. We're going to have a break after the fifth speaker to grab a drink, go outside, breathe some fresh air if you need to, and then we'll continue with the 4 speakers, and yeah. So without further ado, I would like to announce the first speaker, who's a very special person from the Human Rights Watch, working in the Middle East and North Africa, researching... Iraq. Yeah, sorry, thanks. Welcome, Belkis, Wille.
So, in December 2017, I was driving in a circle. I had a GPS location, and I was driving in a spiral from that GPS location, looking for a mass grave site, this site. Why was I there? I was there because in the fall of 2017, there was a final battle against ISIS north of the city of Mosul in northern Iraq. And in this final battle, thousands upon thousands of fighters and their families were captured by Kurdish forces. They were lined up. The men were separated from the women and the children. The women and the children eventually showed up in a camp. They were then transferred to prison, and they're still sitting in Baghdad in prison. Where were the men? The men were nowhere to be found. I had spoken to people who had said to me that these men had been taken away, they had been shot, and they had been killed. I had been able to get photos and video of bodies of these men. With these photos, I was able to get the metadata embedded in the pictures, and I was able to find a GPS coordinate for exactly where the bodies were dumped, and that's how I found that mass grave site. Now, the process of investigation that we went through, from hearing the testimony that people had been killed, through to forensics around verifying photo and video, and then physically trying to get to a location that we then verified through satellite imagery that showed us when exactly that gravesite was dug and how it came to be, is the way that we were able to issue a press release from Human Rights Watch, finding that there had been this mass execution of up to 1,000 individuals who were suspected of having been linked to ISIS. The question I get very often with this work is, why should we care? Why should we care that a bunch of men who decided to go and join ISIS, potentially carry out massacres, hold and rape women, why should we care that they were killed in some desert location? And I'll tell you why I care. I care on the one hand because of the principled reason, the human rights reason. This is not how you handle individuals that are captured. People who are captured get prosecuted in a court of law. That's the way to deal with them if they're said to have committed a crime. But there's another aspect of why I care so much. And I care so much because I've spent a lot of the last 2.5 years speaking to victims of ISIS. Women, for example, who were held as sex slaves for 3 years, sold from man to man, 10 different men over the period of their captivity. Finally, they escaped. And these individuals are robbed of their right to justice if some commander on a battlefield thinks that he gets the right to decide what happens to the men that he captured. And that's what you have across Iraq. You've had mass atrocities committed by all sides, including Iraqi forces, Kurdish forces, rounding up individuals and massacring them on or next to the battlefield. Now, in the face of the executions, you also have those that were captured who are still alive. You have the prosecutions. You have prosecutions of ISIS suspects who were captured, who are being given 5-minute trials, trials that in no way, shape or form respect due process principles. They don't have a defense. They don't have a lawyer who's there to defend them. They don't have any presumption of innocence when they walk before a judge. The same question emerges, I get it all the time. Why should we care that these guys are not getting a fair trial? These guys were ISIS. And again, what I always go back to is the extensive amounts of time that I've spent with victims of some of the most serious atrocities that we've ever seen in our lifetime. They want their day in court. They want to be able to face the men that did this to them, to face women who were complicit in some of these crimes, and to demand that apology, to understand why this person committed this abuse against them, and to get that moment that allows them to heal from the trauma that they lived through. Now we get on to a subject much closer to home, to the Netherlands. What about Dutch who went to Syria and to Iraq? As I'm sure many of you know, there are many foreigners, including hundreds of Europeans, who are in camps in northern Syria, who are in prisons in Iraq. And the response of the entire Western world has been, we don't want them back. There have been generals, including a US general, you've had representatives of the French government, the Belgian government, saying anyone who went to Iraq and Syria should die in Iraq and Syria. Now, the problem with that approach is, first and foremost, as I said, the system in Iraq, the system that's prosecuting these individuals, these foreigners who are in prison in Iraq, go no way at giving victims their right to justice. In fact, victims have no room in Iraq to participate in any of the proceedings. They're not given space in the courtroom, and they're not given space to have their day in court. The other reality is that there are a lot of children involved. Some families brought their children against their will to Iraq and Syria. You have these kids now sitting in camps, or worse still, sitting in prisons in Iraq with their mothers. Some of these kids are 10 or 11 years old. I've seen them be prosecuted by an Iraqi judge. I've heard a child say to the judge, I was brought when I was 9 years old across the border by my parents against my will. And they were prosecuted and convicted because in Iraq, the criminal age of responsibility is 9 years old. You also have kids who are younger, 1 year old, 2 years old. They were born in Iraq and Syria to 2 German parents, 2 Dutch parents. These kids have no paperwork. They're effectively stateless. And the real question is, what's going to happen to all of them? And what terrifies me is that no one, no government is taking a stand, a principled position and saying, whatever we might think about what these people did, first and foremost, our obligation is to the victims and to provide justice to the victims. And second, to get these kids home because they did nothing wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Belkis, for this presentation. Up next is Anne van Leeuwen, who will be speaking about the Embassy of the North Sea, which gives a voice to this body of water and shows its diversity and the importance of its being to the people around it, but to the water itself as well.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Dear representatives of mankind, as the North Sea, I ask you, do you see a future for us? Because in our relationship, I am the one being polluted. I am the one being overfished. My waters and temperatures are rising, and your ships are invading my space. So where do I fit in this equation? For a long time, people thought they were the only players on Earth. Human beings thought they were the only actors against a passive backdrop of things called nature. But in the Anthropocene, ironically called the human era, this very backdrop of things has come to life. Icebergs threaten our shores, water threatens our future, and phytoplankton might let us choke on it. In the Anthropocene, humans have literally crept underneath the skin of the earth. Chlorine layers and part of plastics are becoming part of the earth layers, while plastic return to us in the water we drink and in the fish that we eat. Humans and non-humans have become entangled to a point of no discern. Where in climate change does the human end and the non-human begin? So, we are all now on the same stage. Non-humans, they ask us, they question us, because what is a human being in the Anthropocene? How do we define the borders of an individual or a self? Do I not breathe phytoplankton? Do I not need mitochondria in my cells? Do I not need microbes to process my food? Am I not dependent upon countless non-humans to simply subsist? In the Anthropocene, the indivisible individual, the body has become an entity that is no longer an individual only, because the individual is more than a body. It's become an ecological footprint upon which we all depend. This is why the Embassy of the North Sea pleads for human rights that are no longer only about human beings. We have become entangled beings, and we need to find a way to negotiate with non-humans. Very rarely this already happens. This is the case of the Whanganui River in 2017 in New Zealand, where the river got its own rights as a legal person. The Maori finally got recognition for their view of this river as an entity and a living being. They actually... I'm sorry, I lost my track. Sorry, yeah, can I have this? As a result of a living entity, in fact, the Maori can only state that they start a case because they stated that they are the river. So in the Anthropocene, the indivisible individual as a fundamental entity in human rights gets a whole new meaning. As climate change demonstrates, if we want to subsist, we need to understand that non-humans make up an indispensable part of our livelihoods. The Embassy of the North Sea strives for such emancipation of non-humans, to see phytoplankton, gas fields, bacteria, gulls as full-fledged members of our society. So what is the interest of a harbour porpoise? What is the territory of a hermit crab, and how does water see the future? The Embassy researches such interests through art, science and experience. In 2019 we will be listening to the North Sea, to the sounds of the sea, the smells of the sea and the many stories that the sea holds. So the Embassy of the North Sea also attempts to build more inclusive political systems with collectives of humans and non-humans. Which things and beings share the same territories or interests, whether they like it or not? And how could we find ways of living together? When engaging in such inquiries and conversations, self-reflection is inevitable. Because you become confronted with all these different perspectives that also reflect on how we live and how the world is built up in which we live. And we see self-reflection as a fundamental starting point for an improved relationship between the North Sea and people. So when people engage in conversation through non-humans with themselves, humanity, citizenship and democracy might receive a fundamental new impulse. And this gives the North Sea political perspective, because the declaration of independence might one day become one of interdependence. We hope to radically renew democracy through inclusivity. By multiplying the amount of voices, we might find a politics that actually can represent our entangled way of being. We believe the more diverse, the higher the resilience, and if you accept our political invitation, we could all benefit from it. We are very much looking forward to political cooperation with you. Of course, our conversation will often be rough and tough. Outside the parliament, we will eat and be eaten. But within it, we have enough shared interests to talk about. We feel positive. Your consciousness is growing. As a human, you're a lively and innovative being. You can read DNA, decipher the language of prairie dogs. You can laugh, choose, hesitate, use those talents. Think and dream about your role in the world. And finally, don't forget that the distinction between nature and culture is a purely human illusion. You have the deep history of Earth at your side. Deep down, you came forth from the sea, and once you were lava, rocks, and minerals. You are the rocks dancing, you are the whirling sea, and you are much deeper, generous, worthy, and deeper than you might think. We see a bright future ahead of us, and are looking forward to negotiate with you. Many thanks for your human ears, in hope of a humane response.
Thank you very much for this beautiful and touching presentation from the North Sea. Up next is Mr. Brody, a human rights lawyer at the Council for Human Rights Watch. He'll now talk about his work. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about a prosecution, the only time in the world that the courts of one country have prosecuted a former dictator of another country, Hissène Habré of Chad. And I've been working with his victims for 18 years. Hissène Habré was put into power, as many dictators were, by the United States of Ronald Reagan. He was supported by France. And during his rule in the 1980s, he's alleged to have committed 40,000 murders, as well as systematic torture and waves of ethnic cleansing. When he was overthrown, he fled to Senegal. And it looked like he was going to live there in peace forever, in impunity. But then when several victims, led by a man named Souleymane Gengeng, who were prisoners of Hissène Habré, This is the piscine. It's a former swimming pool that he turned into an underground prison. There were 9 secret prisons in Chad, including one in his backyard. When the prison doors came open, a number of prisoners decided that they were going to fight for justice. And coming out of prison, Suleiman Gengeng began to take files of all the different prisoners and their families. And he put together almost 1,000 files of prisoners, but it looked like nothing was going to happen. As so often, brutality, the man in power just goes somewhere. And then everything changed in 1998, October 16th. The former dictator of Chile, Augusto Pinochet, was arrested in London. The British courts ruled that even as a former head of state, he had no immunity. And Suleiman came to us, that's me, 18 years ago, and said, we want to do what they did. Can you help us? I had worked on the Pinochet case in London. And together with Suleiman and other victims, we helped them file a case. We discovered the files of Hisn Habre's political police, thousands of documents that describe in detail Suleiman's case and many, many others. We put these documents in a database. This is one document with Hisn Habre's handwriting on it, saying that prisoners could not go to the hospital and they could not be seen by the Red Cross because the Red Cross helps them escape. These documents formed the roadmap to the case that we built against Hisn Habre. We had to campaign for 18 years, and one of the keys was teaching advocacy skills to turn the victims into activists. So the victims went around the world campaigning at the United Nations, at the African Union, finally the International Court of Justice in The Hague. They also went after Habre's accomplices back in Chad. And 3 years ago, 22 of Hisn Habre's accomplices back in Chad were prosecuted and convicted for crimes against humanity. In the meantime, Habre is in Senegal, and it took 18 years of campaigning to finally bring him to trial. And here he was actually dragged in kicking and screaming the first day of the case. He didn't want to be obviously on trial, and he refused to participate or to interact with the tribunal. This is a view of the courthouse. The victims were represented by Chadian lawyers. Suleiman and other victims were the lead plaintiffs, and they all testified. But Habre refused, even as people. This is a poster that we plastered up all over Dakar, which is a poster of Suleiman basically asking why Hisn Habre would not even look at him, would not testify at the trial, would not engage with the tribunal. The case was led, as I said, by the victims themselves. This woman, Jacqueline Mudena, was the victim's lawyer. She was almost killed. She had a grenade thrown at her by one of Habre's accomplices. She has shrapnel in her leg, and she pleaded the case on behalf of the victims. A 3-month case during which 93 people testified, including over half of them were victims. This is Suleiman testifying to court, showing the utensils that he made, that he had the presence of mind to bring with him from prison, and explaining to the court that this case was happening because of him and the persistence of the Association of Victims. 4 women testified that they were used as sexual slaves in Hisn Habre's army. This woman was raped personally 4 times by Hisn Habre. The only reason they had the courage to testify was because of the lawyer I showed you before, Jacqueline Mudena. The trial was televised back to Chad, where it was on daily on TV, and there were groupings of people throughout the country. Meetings were held 1/10 of the trial budget, which was financed by the African Union, the European Union, the international community, went for this. Finally, Hissan Habre was convicted of crimes against humanity, of war crimes, of having raped the woman I showed you before, and this is Suleiman and me. And when we finished, people in neighboring Gambia came to us and said, we want to do what they did. And this is a meeting that Suleiman and the victims and I had with Gambian victims of Yahya Jammeh who had been overthrown. So what we're hoping to do is pass it along so that other victims, other activists see that with tenacity and perseverance, it's possible to bring a dictator to justice, even in Africa, even today when international justice is under such attack. Thank you.
Our next guest is a social activist who, since 2011, has been fighting against a very controversial figure of Zwarte Piet, who is the Santa's helper in the Netherlands. His organization, Kick Out Zwarte Piet, has actually been listed as a terrorist on a terrorist assessment document by the National Intelligence. Here to tell us more about it is Jerry.
When I look at this country, this is what I see. A land full of potential. A land that's waiting for us to fulfill our dreams. It's like a canvas, it's empty. And I feel like all of us will have a chance to make something beautiful out of it for the common future. But when this country look at me, mostly when my name is called, this is what the country see. A violent black man, a person who's troublemaker, and even our group has been said, labeled as terrorists. And it makes it very difficult to move from one side to the other. But when you ask me, how do I see myself? I'm just an ordinary man trying to pose for Instagram. I'm a poet, I'm a father, and I'm a human rights activist. This is also me. My whole contribution is, my whole being is to provide and do my part in the black liberation. The struggle of black people is something that touches my heart, and I've dedicated nearly my whole life since very young to it. But also, when we see, when you call yourself human rights activist, it shouldn't be only about yourself. And to me, the struggle of the people of Palestine lives within me. And I will always be vocal about the apartheid condition of the Palestine people. I respect Israel's right to a statehood, and I will even fight for it, just not at the expense of peaceful Palestinian statehood. The right to equality of women, I don't even understand why we have to discuss this. I mean, it doesn't make sense. But at the same time, we celebrated 100 years of voting right for women. It was for white women. Men got to do better, white women got to do better as well. Same thing goes, I do not think, that I respect freedom. And when you respect freedom, I feel like, you got to be solidarity with all type of groups who are facing struggle, who are going through all this life experiences, challenges. One of the things is we started a foundation called Nederland wordt beter. The Netherlands will get better. I hope so. And a foundation that focuses on future without racism and exclusion. We believe that this can be achieved when we recognize our slavery past and of course the heritage of what has left behind, the wounds that it has left behind. But we have made up some of the things that we feel like if we get that out of the way, we can really, make a step towards the future. Now, one of it is education. The fact that Dutch slavery and colonial power have never been discussed in depth in primary and secondary education leads to lack of knowledge and empathy in society. This is why that is one of our goals, education. Our first step towards an inclusive education is working together with the city government. Prior to the last election, they signed our manifesto to make education in Amsterdam equally accessible for every child. And believe it, we are going to hold them accountable for it. And also, I think that we are committed to organizing an annual commemoration and celebration of the abolition of slavery in a respectful and fair manner with respect to the descendants. Togetherness and unity is something that we will center ourselves around, and we feel like this country is really moving behind, and it's time to look into the future. Bye-bye, Zwarte Piet. We believe it's time to say goodbye to this friend of many Dutch people. His appearance refers directly to the Dutch history of colonialism and slavery. He was a school teacher from Amsterdam, Jan Schenkman, who first introduced the character of Zwarte Piet in an 1850 book called Sinterklaas and His Servant. The servant was black. The character, as you can see, is nothing short of a minstrel show. It is dehumanizing and reminds us of the painful Dutch history which is hidden in plain sight from the public. Zwarte Piet is part of the Western culture of dehumanizing black people. It's nothing new, although many Dutch people think Zwarte Piet is special. There has always been protest. This is what you are looking here is a protest in the 90s, where a lot of old people, as you can see, went into the streets to protest. A lot of them were spit on, a lot of them were cursed at, and there's always been people protesting. Even during Second World War, there were protests against Zwarte Piet. Imagine that. And it hasn't moved us where we wanted to be. So in 2011, me, myself, together with some youngsters who were late 20s, early 20s, we came together and we said, this has to stop. And we started the movement, and it is called Zwarte Piet is Racism, or Black Piet is Racism. Now, one of the things we have to realize is we are not only fighting Zwarte Piet, we are fighting institutional racism. What does that mean? That means that the police who are supposed to protect us, you are looking at my back there. They are, in many cases, shown to be the worst enemy we can have. But not only the police. We are seeing the media itself. And I will read this. Recently, we have been seeing a positive shift report about us in the media. However, the biggest newspaper in the country, The Telegraph, has raging war against us, our movement, since it became national. The title on this is The Danger of a Radical Agenda. Well, all we are asking for is a celebration that does not dehumanize, that does not exclude children, but a celebration that includes all Dutch children and population, so we can have a national tradition instead of a national shame. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is here to represent the brand that you can see at the front here, Makers Unite, who create bags, pouches, iPad sleeves out of life vests worn by refugees on their way to Europe in a very beautiful co-creative process. Please welcome Tammy Schweisler.
You pronounce it right. Thank you. She did the whole pitch, so I could just go home. Well, as you see, our approach to a very difficult topic, which is refugee migration and inclusivity of refugees in our community, we take a very different spin on it. We make use of creativity, and we believe that creativity can rebuild the confidence of newcomers in our society, so we now be living together. So start by picturing yourself, who's a very smart professional, and you have your life here, and suddenly everything that you have is to be taken out of you, and your friends, and then your work, and then your living and your home, and then you have to go away. to another country where they don't understand anything. Does anyone know what it means? Yeah, it means hello in Korean. So South Korea is a great country. Imagine that all of us are going to go to South Korea tomorrow with our potential and our families and everything that we can do. I have to restart. And then before restarting, you get upon a system that looks at you and say, stop, wait, do nothing. How do you feel? How do you feel that you have all your potential to unleash and have so many things that can contribute to this country, and you're told by a system that you have to wait, that you are part of a big number? Well, we think that's a big shame. We think there's a lot of potential. And if we get this potential to be close together, we get to rebuild the ways of understanding how this can be part of our society, a lot of things can change. So that looks a little bit crazy, right? So actually, what is happening today in the Netherlands is a bit crazy. 50% of refugees that are in the country for more than 10 years still don't have a stable job. That's pretty alarming. And we're talking about there are 200,000 refugees in the Netherlands today, one of the best welfare systems in the world. So what's wrong? What's the difference between a refugee and you? I think it's pretty simple. It's about confidence. Before a refugee stops and comes over here, we call refugees newcomers, by the way, their confidence has been broken 2 times. The first is because you see this black screen, you had to flee your country. You have to leave everything behind. And the second is, you come here after crossing this boat, after having all the horror of your life, you have to face a system that doesn't treat you as a person, but treats you as a number. So when we start to come together and understand and listen by newcomers and say, hey, what do you want to do here? They say, well, we would like to work. And then we ask Dutch people and say, Dutch people, what do you think about this orange life vest? Well, I think orange is the color of the Netherlands. So that's what we did. We did a campaign called Reverse Life, which is a ribbon made of life vest that we brought from Greece. And we recycled that there in new products, and this was the first one. And behind this ribbon, we had a message to society that says that if you recognize the potential of newcomers and we work together, we can build a new society for all, a new community where we learn from each other. And I think that is a win-win situation. So this for us was a way of getting to meet people. And the most important is that during this making process, we started to understand that this is a safe space where newcomers have the place of coming to meet locals and coming to understand how things work over here. And locals can share opportunities. So during this campaign, newcomers start to get to internships, to jobs. They got to connect to Dutch students and they get to find a place to live. And then we thought, oh, how cool. Let's get inspired. This is the story of Hassan. He was a tailor from Syria, 21 years old. And during this campaign, he came to me and said, hey, I want to be a computer engineer. All right, potential. Let's call a friend. They had a coding school. He started to study. And now 3 years later, he's working in a very big company here as a computer engineer. So what happened there for us was basically a way to showcase potential. And then we're stimulated to become a social enterprise that shows potential of newcomers and starts by showing awareness. So this campaign that we did here in Amsterdam, we brought to other places, went to Venice, to the Architecture Biennale, and did a big installation, very pixelized, of the responsibility of architects of doing things about migration. We had campaigns that we did here in Amsterdam only to show, to create awareness about the distance that we have between ourselves and a newcomer. And the last one was a campaign in the Stedelijk with Arne Groenberg, where 17 artists from our collective were there for a full month making artwork and showcasing their potential. And I got 3 people employed. That's not part of it. And we make products. I'm not sure if you have seen them, which in the break they're going to be here. Well, our products are not only a means to connect people, but they are a means to help to share this message that started with a ribbon. They're still made of life vests that we still bring from Greece, and we brought more than 5,000 here to Amsterdam. And the most important is that we work in a system where we call this the power of making. We use this space to get to know people, and we train them, we help them to understand how the next networks work, and then we connect them after 6 weeks to a next step in their career plan. So they go into jobs, education, training, and the products that we make, we sell and support social business system. We won the refugee challenge from UNHCR and what design can do with this concept. And after 2.5 years, we trained more than 110 people. Now have 80% of them that were already connected to the next step. So it looks really fine, but look at the size of the problem. So our intention here is to have a shareable system where we want to implement in other countries. So we're starting our feasibility study in Greece to adapt our model there, have products being produced, have people being connected, and creating beautiful stories like the one I would like to share with you now, which is Ramzi, which is the reason that we made this bag that is over here.
At Makers Unite, we make products with a story. My name is Ramzi. I have 25 years experience in tailoring. When I arrived in the Netherlands, it was a little bit hard to find a job, especially in sewing, till I met Makers Unite. We are like a family here, working together, sharing knowledge and experience. We are making a beautiful and unique products with a good quality. And the best of it, Makers Unite helped me to find my own job in a big company. This product tells my story. The more products we make, the more story we tell.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I feel like that was a lot of information for you. So right now we'll have a 15-minute break for you to take a drink, get everything sorted out in your brain, think about all of the inspirational people that you just heard, and we'll meet you back here in 15 minutes. You can also check out Makers Unite products here up the front. Okay, welcome back everyone. I hope you got to get a drink. And now we would like to welcome our next speaker, Minke Warden, who is the Director of Global Initiatives at the Human Rights Watch and editor of numerous books about human rights, for example, women's rights. She'll now say more about herself and her work.
Thank you, everyone. Nothing brings the world together like sport. And we have a chance to use sport to eradicate some of the world's worst human rights abuses. How did I get interested in this topic? In 1992, I moved to Hong Kong, which then was a British colony, and I had a chance to experience the freedoms that many people don't. In 1989, this is the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, this year, the 30th anniversary. 1989, the Chinese government sent troops to massacre young people, workers, and others in Tiananmen Square. In Hong Kong, it also caused a reaction. More than 1 million people gathered twice in Hong Kong streets to call for democracy, human rights, and basic freedoms. So living in Hong Kong, I had the perspective and the understanding that there are many rights and freedoms that are not realized around the world. The Chinese government, to recover from the Tiananmen Square massacre, had a plan. They were going to host the Olympics. Deng Xiaoping, the paramount leader, said we must host the Olympics, and they bid to host the Olympics in 1993. I took this picture in Shanghai in 1993. China did not win the Olympics because of the Tiananmen Square massacre, but they came back again and they bid and they won the right to host the Olympics in 2008. But those Olympics were built on human rights abuses. Forced evictions, as many as 10,000 people bulldozed from their home. Migrant workers building the great Bird's Nest Stadium. Journalists arrested, civil society repressed. And at Human Rights Watch, we documented all of these terrible abuses in a series of book-length reports. But we thought there's got to be a better way. Sport should not bring human misery. It is about uplifting humanity. So only a few years later, in 2014, Russia hosted the Sochi Olympics. And again, these Olympics were built on a framework, a structure of human rights abuses. It was the same abuses that we'd seen in Beijing. Forced evictions without compensation, migrant labor abuses, the cheating of workers. This is a report that Human Rights Watch produced that showed that there was a cheating of workers and serious abuses on every single one of the Olympic venues for the Sochi Olympics. People want to watch sport, but they don't want to sit in stadiums that workers died to build. They want to enjoy the Olympics without worrying about the anti-gay law that Russia passed 6 months before the Sochi Olympics. This was an anti-gay so-called propaganda law that made it a civil penalty to say anything positive about LGBT people. It created a climate of hatred and abuse. This is the St. Petersburg Stadium. How many of you in the audience watched the World Cup in Russia this summer? Show of hands, everyone? The World Cup in Russia this summer contributed to the deaths of 21 workers building stadiums, building a dozen stadiums. The St. Petersburg Stadium that you just saw had North Korean slave laborers building it, and at least one worker died building that stadium. And yet we see the power of sport. FIFA reports that half the world's population, ages 4 and above, watched the World Cup this year, right? That's a record number. So half of the world's population. Surely we can do a better job of mobilizing that population to care about human rights abuses. This is the Turkmenistan Stadium. The Turkmen government hosted the Asian Indoor Martial Arts contest and built that stadium. Here you see Qatar winning the World Cup with Sepp Blatter. This is an example of the future challenge for human rights organizations. In the year 2022, China will host the Winter Olympics in February, and then in November, Qatar will host the World Cup. Qatar had no meaningful infrastructure to host the World Cup, so it's building these fantastically designed stadiums. How are they doing it? They're doing it with migrant workers. The population of Qatar is about 300,000. There are 2 million migrant workers who are building the stadiums in incredible heat. The workers who are dying entirely preventable deaths, either from a lack of basic safety or from heat and exhaustion. So these are some of the workers who are building the stadiums that some of you may in fact sit in if you go to see the World Cup. Another area that Human Rights Watch works on is access to sport for millions of women around the world. This is a picture, it's one of my favorite pictures, of Sarah Attar. She was the first Saudi woman to compete in the London 2012 Olympics. Before that, Saudi Arabia got away with sending all-male teams. In a country like Iran, women and girls can't even watch sports. It is banned for the 41 million women of Iran to attend a sport, to go to a soccer game, to go to a volleyball game, and cheer their national team. But this is something that they are fighting. Women in Iran will tell you, we want to go to stadiums because it's our right to be part of the life of the country. Other major sporting events that we have on the horizon include the Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics. Tokyo is a first world country and yet has no laws banning discrimination against women and LGBT people. When we look ahead beyond the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, we see the China Olympics in the winter of 2022. Xi Jinping's China is executing the worst repression in the post-Tiananmen period. So to take you back to the slide from Tiananmen Square, we have the possibility, however, of using the 2022 Olympics and new systems that we've put in place. Human rights system, human rights protections. FIFA has a human rights policy. The IOC now has human rights protections. And there is, for the first time, when China comes back for the Olympics in 2022, we hope that we will have a better game and a game that we can all support. Thank you.
Our next speaker is an artist, Yuri Veerman, who works with the ideas of identity, nation, people, and manifests them in the forms of images and words. He'll talk more about that right now.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So, as we know from the last lecture, in 2013, Russia passed an anti-gay propaganda law a crazy law which pretty much means that if you're waving a rainbow flag in front of a child, you can get yourself into trouble and get yourself into jail. Around the same time, so 6 years ago, our Prime Minister Mark Rutte invited President Putin to come over for dinner to talk business and maybe some human rights. And at the same time, COC, the Dutch gay rights organization, asked a colleague of mine, Brigitte van den Berg, and myself to design a campaign that would respond to the situation in Russia and the fact that Putin was now having dinner with our Prime Minister. We came up with a response, this website, which is maybe the best word joke that I have come up with. Putinarainbow.com. It was a very low budget website, and we asked people to send in an image that combined two symbols, the symbol of the gay community and the face of Vladimir Putin. And then this is what you get. So it was a lot of fun to work on this project, to simply set up this website, to only ask this question, and then get these responses. And from here, many of these images were used online, some went viral, and they were even, this is what I wanted to say. That it was interesting to see how different images had a different type of quality. Like some were funny and they were shared online, some were just plain weird, and others had a really iconic quality. And especially the image on the right was such a strong image that during protests against the Sochi Olympics, these images were reused. And that's Erdogan dressed up as a gay person. So it gave me a really good feeling that we designed this website as a tool for other people to express themselves. And this image was even reused so much that it's now on the list of extremist materials in Russia, and you can get either a €50 penalty or up to 15 days in jail for spreading this message on Twitter. And I think part of the reason that this campaign was a success is because it's super easy to do, it's super easy to find, and because it combines these two popular symbols, the rainbow flag and Putin's face, everybody gets the joke. And then, I decided while I'm here, I'll show another project. This is called Who Owns the City? A campaign about the fact that Amsterdam is becoming too popular. Less than 1 million people live in Amsterdam, but last year more than 18 million people visited the city. That's more than the entire population of the country. And this popularity has a serious effect on the social fabric of a city. If you live in Amsterdam, you know that over the last decade, housing prices have skyrocketed. Actually, each year, hundreds of families get evicted from their homes because they can no longer pay the rent. Many people are forced to leave the city. At the same time, many people use their house to make money. The use of Airbnb has increased. Many people buy houses simply to invest. So a year ago, a friend and fellow designer, Ruben Pater, who actually initiated this campaign, asked me to make a few protest posters to respond to this situation. Again, we made a simple website where people could share the posters online or download them to put them behind your window, which is a bit old-fashioned. Not a lot of people do that anymore. But it was interesting to see that this campaign actually had a much bigger presence offline than online. And again, I like the fact that it really grew in an organic way. We made this website, and from then it was the question if people would adopt it and accept it and spread it. This is actually an initiative called We Are Here, a group of asylum seekers without papers. They cannot go back and they cannot stay, so they are forced to squat. The posters are all in Dutch. So on the left is Scrooge McDuck, who says, do you want to buy some real estate? And on the right is a big jar of Nutella with the text, I do not like the taste of monoculture, hinting at the many Nutella shops in Amsterdam and the fact that everything is kind of looking the same, is turning into a formula. These lovely posters were actually made, or these lovely photos were actually made by an outdoor advertising agency called Centercom. The posters of our campaign were pasted over their posters. Now they're even threatening with a legal case. And I actually think that's funny because it showed me that there's so little space in public space for dissident messages, for non-official messages. So I was actually really happy that these posters that you saw were downloaded from our website. You can go to the URL if you want to download some and paste yourself. Please do not do it illegally, because then we can get in trouble. But I was happy to see that it's still possible to use public space to say something about the city that you're living in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next is the Israel and Palestine Director of the Human Rights Watch. Please welcome Mr. Omar Shakir.
Thank you. More than a half century after the Israeli army occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, it controls these areas today through repression, institutionalized discrimination, and systematic abuse of the rights of Palestinians. The Israeli authorities have transferred over 600,000 of its own citizens to the West Bank, territory it acquired by war, a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention and a war crime. In December of 2016, the United Nations Security Council declared unanimously, with the United States abstaining, that settlements are illegal, reiterating years of UN resolutions. In the West Bank, in this area where Israeli settlers lived, the Israeli authorities have set up a two-tiered discriminatory system in which Israeli settlers vote in Israeli elections, are citizens of Israel, are subject to Israeli civil law, can move freely, have full access to water, electricity, and other services, while Palestinians cannot move freely, are subject to military law, are not citizens of Israel, and receive water and electricity on a discriminatory basis. Companies play a key role in fueling these abuses. In 2016, we released a report called Occupation Inc. that found that businesses that operate in settlements benefit and contribute to serious rights abuses and should stop. Take, for example, Airbnb, which was mentioned in the last presentation, and the Dutch company Booking.com, which broker rentals on land stolen from Palestinians who themselves are barred from staying there. The only example in the case of Airbnb in the world in which someone's banned from staying there solely because of their national or ethnic origin. So the system works as following. The Israeli army takes control, or settlers take control of a piece of land. They expropriate it from Palestinians. They build settlements. The settlements go up on Airbnb or Booking.com, and Palestinians are barred from staying there. So how did we do the research? We first looked at Israeli army records. We engaged hosts to find their addresses. We were able to determine through that the status of the land, whether it was stolen from Palestinians, it was taken over as state land. And then we actually went to the Palestinian villages to find the real landowners. Like 70-year-old Aouni Shuaib from the village of Ein Yabrud, who in 1970s, settlers took over his land, which records from the army show belongs to him, and there's now a property listed on Airbnb and Booking.com in which not only did he not consent to the rental, not only did he not receive any of the profits from the rental, but in fact he himself could not stay in the property on his own land solely because he's Palestinian. By the way, he happens to also be an American citizen, but that's irrelevant when it comes to Israel's discriminatory regime in the settlements. So a day before we released our report documenting these abuses, Airbnb, after 2 years of engagement, announced that it would stop. It would delist its listing in settlements in the occupied West Bank. Booking.com has yet to do so. It continues to contribute to the viability of settlements, and it should stop doing so. As you can imagine, the Israeli government does not take well to our work on business and human rights. In May of 2018, it ordered me to leave the country within 14 days, alleging that our work on business and human rights and settlements was part of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions effort against Israel. It, of course, said this wasn't about Human Rights Watch, but it was actually just about me. And it produced an intelligence dossier on my activities going back to my days as a college student. And you can see some of those great allegations on the board. The dossier included things like screenshots of student group websites, petitions I had signed, clients who I had represented. But while they say it's only about me and not Human Rights Watch, this file that they submitted to the court last month includes things like tweets of mine that promote our research documenting rights abuses by companies that operate in settlements. So while they say it's about me personally, in many ways this is really part of a months-long effort to muzzle Human Rights Watch's research and documentation around rights abuses. And it's part of a long campaign. In February of 2017, for example, the Israeli government said that Human Rights Watch could not have a foreign employee, period, in Israel on the basis that we were propagandists for the Palestinians and not a real human rights group. Of course, apparently we're not very good propagandists. In October of 2018, for example, we released a 150-page report documenting systematic arbitrary arrests and torture by both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And this was not a one-time thing. We've been documenting these abuses since 1994, when Palestinians gained a degree of self-rule. But after I got that work permit in 2017, an Israeli group sued us, actually sued the government, alleging that they violated their own law by allowing a boycott activist into the country. That suit led to a government process which led to the May 2018 deportation order. We were able, though, after May 2018, to get an injunction from the court that froze the enforcement of the decision until the end of legal proceedings. We are continuing to fight the case in court. My status in the country today is only the court papers that are freezing enforcement of the deportation. That's me in the courtroom back over the summer. In March next month, we'll face a probably final hearing in which the court will decide that either the deportation order is valid and I'll have to leave the country, or Human Rights Watch can continue to operate there. Human Rights Watch operates in many countries around the world, and although Israel claims to be the region's only democracy, it continues to take these kinds of actions. Our case is in no way unique. It comes at a time in which the Israeli government has denied access to other international rights activists. It's accused Israeli human rights groups of slander and discrediting the state and army, and Palestinian rights defenders have faced it the worst, facing travel restrictions and even arrest. And this is also my first time getting denied entry somewhere. I've had similar experience in Egypt, in Syria, and Bahrain. And one thing I've learned from this experience is that no government will succeed in hiding its rights abuse by expelling those who document them. We'll continue to do our job, and we hope you'll continue to support human rights defenders. Thank you.
I am very sorry to announce that our next speaker is in fact the last one of this evening, but not to say the least, of course. Please welcome Krol, an artist who works in the public space and does a lot of guerrilla action as well.
Hello. I'm a visual artist, so I'm gonna tell a story that is slightly different, but it concerns a very basic human right. Housing and a safe space to stay. Nowadays, living in our modern society is quite complicated, actually. To fit in the system, you have to require many social, financial, civil demands and obligations. Becoming homeless seems far away, but actually it can happen to anyone. A new financial bubble is currently in the making. And more people will become homeless when this will erupt soon. when this will erupt sooner or later. Like we have also hostile or defensive architecture, and this is an urban design trend. And many cities are trying to push homeless out of the public space, out of the city. For example, this structure to prevent sitting on it or to put a tent on. And we have also, this is also a famous example. The Camden bench will show up now, yes. And this is a masterpiece of unpleasant design. It's preventing undesirable behavior such as sleeping, littering, skateboarding, drug dealing, etc. And also, due its weight, it can also be used as a roadblock. You can pick it up and so on. Well, considering this, hostile architecture has something ridiculous. With all the spikes and the strange shapes, it is criticized by many, like the American artist Sarah Ross, who designed special clothing to ignore the anti-sleeping design of a bench you can see here. Well, okay, so back to my art projects. This last year I was doing the opposite of hostile architecture. I was facilitating sleeping in public space. I had no license or permit, but we were just acting that we had it, that it was legal. I built a official-looking place, accessible for anyone, not only for homeless people. And the space was designed to be impossible to claim ownership of it. It had to be public all the times. The public shelter was situated underneath a bridge in the city of Ghent in Belgium, and the conditions were perfect there. The location was also well known by homeless people. But from inside the shelter, you can pull up the ladder so you can sleep safely. Normally, sleeping in public space is quite stressful because of the chance of being robbed or physical abuse or caught by the police. The shelter was, inside you found a easy to clean mattress. You can see it here, sorry for the pixels. And it had also an LED light on batteries. And for the light there was also semi-transparent windshields. You see in the next picture. And yeah. At this moment, you can see that the ladder is on. And I was also a bit worried about the noise of the traffic above it, but actually it was a quite nice sound, so it was relaxing also. That was also funny. But at the moment, the ladder is taken away by the authorities, so the shelter is empty now, and that's a pity. But I have more ideas. In Dutch cities, you see a lot of these bicycle storage on the streets. For example, in Rotterdam, you find it on every street, and we are very used to it now. So also we don't see them anymore. But also I discovered that it's the size is big enough to stay. To host one person. It's high enough to sit, and it is also long enough to sleep. So the idea is to create a polyester cabin, which you can slide in the bicycle storage, and then you have like a very small kitchen with a jerry can with water and a bed and a door. And from the outside, it doesn't look like a shelter. In fact, any, let's say, infrastructural objects can be used for sleeping places by camouflaging or faking the outside of the object. So my plan is also to create fake like electricity or transformer houses into illegal tiny houses. And And the houses are also movable, so you can pick it up easily by a crane, and you can put it wherever you want to live. Light is provided by windows behind those steel, how do you call it, slats, and also by a roof window. And from the inside, it can be, furnitured like this. So here you see also the roof window, and a small kitchen is possible. The cabins are also completely off the grid. So electricity is provided by solar panels on the roof of the cabin, and water is provided by tanks, but maybe I'm also thinking to connect it to the official pipeline water system to do it illegally. And yeah, here you see an example of interior. Last thing I want to say, this is not a proposal for a solution for all the housing problems of homeless. It's more a gesture to rethink the housing problem and to think a bit outside of the box on the topic. So, thank you.
Well, that concludes our night of lovely presentations. Once again, I would like to thank all of the presenters for doing such amazing pitches. And of course, audience, thank you very much for being very active and enthusiastic. Thank you. Thank you to the Human Rights Watch, of course, and the Balie for hosting us. And we have another event coming up of PechaKucha, if you like this one. It's on the 20th of February at the QO Hotel in Amsterdam, so we hope to see many of you there. But for now, have a drink, talk to each other, share ideas and thoughts that you have after these events. And thank you very much. Good night.
Outside of the box on the topic. So, thank you.
Well, that concludes our night of lovely presentations. Once again, I would like to thank all of the presenters for doing such amazing pitches. And of course, audience, thank you very much for being very active and enthusiastic. Thank you. Thank you to the Human Rights Watch, of course, and the Balie for hosting us. And we have another event coming up of PechaKucha, if you like this one. It's on the 20th of February at the QO Hotel in Amsterdam, so we hope to see many of you there. But for now, have a drink, talk to each other, share ideas and thoughts that you have after these events. And thank you very much. Good night.